thank you very much, and thanks, Corinne, for inviting me. You put me in a rather slightly difficult spot because somehow you want me to tell you about the future also, about education. And if I knew, then we would all not be sort of doing so much guesswork in this field of education. But nevertheless, I try my best. For those of you who may not be fully aware, of course, the Van Gogh Museum is a big name, is nowadays a big brand also in a way. But just a few aspects about the museum. It is the only Van Gogh museum in the world. I say that deliberately because there are 5 Picasso museums, but there's really only one Van Gogh museum, which means that we have the largest collection of his work in our collection, with a number of the most iconic works, paintings, drawings, and almost the entire correspondence. And what is so critical about Van Gogh is, I say that, and of course in France it's almost sacrilege, even though the French sometimes would like to claim that Van Gogh is French, but no, he's Dutch. But Picasso, who was not French either, but Spanish, might be the most famous artist on the planet. We like to claim that it is Vincent van Gogh, and it's up to you to decide. But what is so critical about Vincent van Gogh is that is the emotional dimension around him. Van Gogh is not only a sort of well-known artist, and one should know his work and the art history, but what was, and I'm sorry I missed the talks yesterday when there was so much talk about emotion, because the emotional engagement with Vincent van Gogh is so enormous, and that has everything to do both with his art, but of course also with his life, because of course to us he appears as sort of almost the archetypical perfect artist, misunderstood, not successful, driving his vision against the odds, as it were, and then of course the untimely premature suicide, leaving us with the question, what would have happened had he lived longer? And that touches really people so deeply that the emotional connection with the artist is enormous. And that means for us also at the museum, our mission really is to introduce our audiences to the art and life of Vincent van Gogh and the art of his time. That's important to add as well. And then to inspire them. And the inspirational part for us is very important, because we feel that you really touch people through the emotional involvement and inspire them, and that ultimately stimulates personal development, stimulates learning, and really that for us is, as it were, the core of our educational activities. We have a number of challenges, and they may sound like luxury problems to you, but for us, the enormous number of visitors with regards to education is a big challenge. Our museum is, I think it fits probably 5 times into the big hall of the Grand Palais. So it is quite small, but this year we are facing the prospect of possibly achieving more than 2.2 million visitors. I know by Parisian standards that's nothing, but in Amsterdam, for a town, again, this size, that's quite considerable. So we really need to deal with sort of every square inch of the building, which means that, and we had an eloquent talk about great spaces and great facilities for education this morning in Montreal, and we are really struggling for every square centimeter, as it were, and we cannot make as much space available in the museum to dedicated education spaces as we would like to be. And it also means that education, because we very strongly feel that it actually should happen in the galleries in front of the actual works of art, is also somewhat constricted because the museum is just so crowded. So we need to find other ways around that. And then the other aspect also is for us that 85% of our visitors come from abroad. So that suggests that we have a beautifully diverse international audience, many cultural backgrounds, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But it also means, because of the large numbers, that the threshold for our local audiences to come to the museum keeps getting higher and higher. Because guess what? The most quoted phrase to me from any Amsterdamer is, yeah, I'd love to come to a museum if it weren't for the queue outside. So that for us is a real issue. How do we engage our local audiences? Because after all, we are a Dutch museum. We are a museum in Amsterdam, and we must never lose sight of that. So those are the more immediate challenges connected to our situation. But of course, and we have talked about this, and you're all aware of that, that of course there are larger changes afoot. By now, a few years ago, we still talked about people turning into digital natives. Now they have arrived. Everyone by now seems, if not a digital native, then also now even my parents, who are in almost in their 80s, have become sort of digital citizens somehow. So everyone is embracing that, and that is a reality. Now that in and of itself is maybe a truism, but what it means is that, and we also as a research institute, we would like to claim that our unique selling point is knowledge around Vincent van Gogh. Well, guess what? It's not. Because, you put anything in combination with Van Gogh into Google, you get more information than you could ever digest. So our unique selling point is no longer really just knowledge about Van Gogh. We generate a lot of knowledge around Van Gogh, but it's not that unique anymore. So for us, it also means that we have sort of put much more emphasis on the fact that it's the combination of the knowledge that we have around the artist plus, of course, the collection. So for us, and there was also a discussion earlier in the session, how important it is to make it part of your educational mission to get people actually to come to the museum and enjoy the original works of art, or whether it is enough also to be out in the community. And we are aware that we cannot get everyone to the museum. So yes, we engage with people outside, but we still feel that ideally the contact with the work of art, with the images, with the wheat field with crows, as it were, is crucial. And it is that combination, our collection and our knowledge around it, that makes for the unique selling point. Then in terms of the demographics, again, not that surprising. You all know that migration is one issue. By 2040, 30% of Amsterdammers will have a migration background, and equally in around that time, a quarter of the population will be 65 and above. So the aging of the population is an aspect as well, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So for us, with that in mind, one of the questions that we've been asking ourselves really, and that of course is, if you like, the Holy Grail, how do you remain relevant to that ever-changing society? How do you engage with them? Because the truth of the matter is, and let us be really brutally honest here, we know from our visitor research, if I look around the room, you're pretty much our audience. Demographically speaking, age-wise speaking, from your educational background, you come to our museum. And then it doesn't really matter which country you come from. It is across the board pretty much the same socioeconomic and educational background, which means that a large part of the population around us we don't really reach. And now the nub of it is we don't actually really know them. We talk about them incessantly. Politics talks about them all the time. They want us to bring them in, embrace them, hug them, kiss them, teach them, whatever. But actually, we don't really know who they are, and we don't really know how to engage with them. So I will come back to that again in a minute. There's a bit of a cliffhanger to tell you about what we're doing. So in our educational strategy, we are now focusing really on two large units. And one is the people who are curious about Van Gogh, or Van Gogh, Van Gogh, however you want to pronounce him. People are curious, but those are the people who already know about him, who are fans. And our fan base is, of course, global because, as I said, he's the most famous artist on the planet. We have also, in that sense, a global challenge to deal with that huge fan base that the artist has. He is like a rock star, really. And he has transcended the average fame of an artist. He has gone way sort of beyond that. But the other part, and that is sort of more challenging, is of course, how do you arouse curiosity? And here we have, of course, the youth, schools, and families. That is what we are all engaged with. Then for us, very specifically, the 18 to 30-year-old Amsterdammers, of whom so many will soon be, the majority of whom will soon have an educational background. This phone is really annoying me. Sorry. And then, well, it sounds a bit disrespectful, the differently abled, disabled people with all sorts of challenges, and then the elderly. And I will tell you more about them in a minute. So it is really how do we engage with that right side of the audience, and how do we get engaged with them. And we feel that we need really to do that, and this already, Universions in the earlier session already talked about that, is by engaging with those groups, to get into dialogue with them, and to discover, and this is important for us, to discover together what their needs are, what withholds them from coming to the museum, where the threshold is, what they might expect from us, or even really why they don't give a shit, I mean, why they should even come to us. Because we feel that only once we can signal to people that we take them seriously, that we take their needs seriously, but that we also really make an effort to understand who they are, to get to know them, that then they might hopefully also feel confidence and trust us that they could have an interesting learning experience with us. So for us, it is really about co-creation, and then not so much co-creation in terms of exhibitions. I'm quite explicit about that. I still do feel there's a reason why there is a profession that's called curator. There's a reason why people study history of art. There's a reason why people spend their entire careers studying collections and works of art. So I will not ask the hairdresser from around the corner to help us curate an exhibition. But what we will do, we will engage people from the community in developing learning content, and to see what it is, how we can engage with them. Just a few examples how we engage with these groups on the right. We have our Friday evenings. We have had them since 2004. Every museum has evening openings, of course. Everyone who works in a museum knows that it is not a matter of course that people come to museums in the evening. In our case, it has become a matter of course. We have about between 6 and 10 in the evening, about 1,000 people coming still through the door. And we are targeting very specifically the Amsterdam millennials. They are very sensitive to trends and fashions. And so it is cross-medial programming that we do. The theater background comes in handy at that moment. But we deal with people in fashion, music, VJs, film. Here you see Piet Parra, who is a hero among young Amsterdammers, a young creative designer, draftsman. And we actually, our programmer in the museum, they go out into the community and they scout talent, and they scout people who help us develop the programming for those Friday evenings. However, what is really important is that program always needs to tie back to the collection. We once had, I remember this, a short anecdote, a few years ago, we had these two super cool DJs coming in from Barcelona. And without any advertising, there was a queue around the block to the museum, because word of mouth had somehow seeped through Amsterdam. They came in, the audience came in, they did their gig, and the audience was gone. Not a single one went into the collection after the concert. And I said, that was the first and the last time that we've done that, because it totally misses the point. If we cannot tie the cool DJ, music, drinks, evening atmosphere somehow back to the collection, we become just a party venue, and that's the last thing we want to do. And so last year we did an event with Armin van Buuren, one of the most famous DJs in the world, but he had actually also developed a portion of our multimedia tour with his music. And then the presentation, and with the concert, it tied in the museum. So that for us is crucial. Another example is a project we did blindfolding people and then describing paintings to them. And that's a bit like what we had in the earlier session when, you know, these people, blind people touch the elephant and all sort of different things. Well, this, of course, in a way happens here too, and sort of it intensifies then afterwards your experience. In terms of diversity, as I already said, that is, of course, a really a big challenge. And if you know, I had the answer to that, I could probably comfortably retire, because I would sell the concept to all of you, you know, how to reach culturally and also that by socioeconomically diverse audiences. That is really sort of the biggest challenge. And we have decided not to, at the moment, to, I don't want to say drop the activities, but reduce the activities and not remain in this very sort of action-oriented activist mode. But we are taking a pause. We have received a grant from a foundation in the Netherlands for 4 years, and we are going to engage into a research program of 4 years. And it will involve the Moroccan, Turkish, Antillean, and Suriname communities in our country. There will be an advisory board, and we will engage with them because we want to get to know them. We want to find out really and develop the ideas, what is it that could make us relevant to those communities, because we really, and I mean, yes, of course, we can have sort of another little project and bust some people in, and they will come, and I'm sure they'll have a good time, but that's not really a sustainable model in our view. That is sort of short-term actionism, and it looks good in the annual report, but it does not somehow take into account that our societies are changing, and if in 10, 20, 30 years' time we have lost those parts of the audience and we don't know how we could become relevant to them, it'll be too late. So we are very keen to develop this further, and so I can only present the mother of all cliffhangers and say we'll tell you in a few years' time what our findings are. Because it is, of course, all about the barriers and how we you know, can take them away, and how we can find really hooks to pique people's interest and get them engaged. We do a lot in terms of visitor research, and not only visitor research, but research really into the demands and the requirements of our different target groups. And by that, for example, we found out that teachers have a rather specific interest. Nowadays, of course, they don't write with chalk on blackboards anymore. I'm being told they write now on, they have whiteboards and can call anything up from the web anywhere. But as I said, there is so much knowledge out there, but how, as a teacher who is not particularly specialized in Van Gogh, do you then deal with Van Gogh? So we've created an online platform with short lessons, including scripts and the whole works, that teachers can pick and choose from, combine in whichever way they want in order to bring Van Gogh to the classroom, because it is really the teachers who know best what their students need, and not that we know that. We provide the reliable information. And so it is ready-made to some degree, but allows for flexibility that the teachers then can use. And of course, the other rather traditional and of course most practiced aspect that we all do is the trusted guided tour through the museum. Of course, every visitor ideally would like to be taken by their hand and taken around the museum, but do we really know what makes for a good museum guide? Do you know what makes for a good docent? very little research has been done in this area. So we've also invested in a research project into that together with our neighbors, the Rijksmuseum, the Stedelijk Museum, and the University of Amsterdam. And I realize it's clashing with your conference in Los Angeles. But for those of you who are not going to Los Angeles, come to Amsterdam because we'll present our research results. One aspect that is really important to me that I will mention, even though I may go slightly over time, and that is that, of course, we have all been chasing the young. And of course, also our politicians have always told us, develop the audiences of the future. They are the ones that, you know, you will have to develop early on to lower the threshold and so forth. But given the aspect of our aging society, that goes and also financial cuts in healthcare and care for the elderly, I promise you will create still an avalanche of problems that we are not even thinking about yet. Because the vital elderly, everyone of course wants the cool people who are just 65, have lots of disposable income, travel widely, you know, embracing digital. Those are, you know, the easy. That's like shooting fish in the barrel. But of course, all these people will eventually end up lonely at home. They will have their physical limitations, you know, illnesses and all of that. And what happens then? And there will not be enough money to have them in full care for the elderly. They will be kept at home for longer. And we already know from research now that lots of elderly people, a third of elderly people indicate that they feel lonely. So there is a big social problem heading our way, and so we are engaging with the sector, with the care sector, and we have developed programs for elderly people, and I love my favorite one is the one at the top. We don't care so much for bingo and that kind of thing. I mean, so little is expected of you. Here you can learn something. So we go out into the community, we engage them, and more than 50% of the elderly who come then also to local centers, community centers and so forth, have never been to museums, often have not even engaged with culture. And the ultimate goal is still then to get them to the museum. However, here comes the next challenge, namely, is your museum proof for people with all sorts of physical limitations? And yes, I mean, anyone can get a wheelchair in, but I'm not talking about that. Do you have enough rest space? Can people sit? Are your labels of a size that you can actually read them rather than guess what's on them? All these things. Is your museum really equipped to receive people? And in our case, where we are so crowded, it is a big challenge for us, but that goes hand in hand with that whole project, and something that we are developing further, and we are very much investing a lot of resources. I'm not saying that we've dropped the kids, not by a long shot, but we're engaging a lot more with the audiences. So I will leave it almost at that, just to say at the end, for us, education is obviously at the core of our mission and of what we do, but what is crucial for us that it goes hand in hand constantly with research and development, that we're working together, and that we also across the institution with the curators, but also with marketing, also with facilities, IT, and that, you know, that is really in that way embedded in the institution, and that the entire staff appreciates that and tries to learn and embrace those activities. So that for us, the power of education comes from the motivation that we are a learning institution that is a learning institution for people to learn at, but a learning institution also that keeps learning. Thank you very much.